Next on Investigative Report. Presidency by prophecy. What if the biblical beast is a woman? In the book of Revelations, written over 1,055 years ago, a prophecy was given about the beast or the Antichrist. Since then, most scholars and laypersons have looked to the future for a male figure that would appear near the end of time. But what if the beast were not a man, but a woman instead? How would this affect the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict? In this investigative report, we seek to suggest a different antagonist for the end times event, as well as why it would be easier for this figure to be a woman over a man. Currently, Kamala Harris serves as the second highest position of global power. Should the President of the United States pass away, she will be granted his position by the 25th Amendment of the Constitution.
Please raise your right hand.
At that time, none of us will be the wiser, as most of us would cheer on her unelected position, power over prophecy.
That I will support and defend.
And now, presidency by prophecy. What if the biblical beast is a woman?
All enemies, foreign and domestic.
Any serious candidate for the nomination of President of the United States had better remain on the campaign trail from sunup to sundown. To her credit, this would not be the case for Vice President Harris, for she has a leg up on history. Typically, candidates ride cramped and sweaty coach buses, like the 9 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 3 independent candidates for president towards the end of 2023. The average candidate shakes thousands of hands and gives several hundred speeches, all just to fall short of the nomination of the party. Kamala Harris is familiar with these road trips because she ran out of money and fell short of the delegates needed to clinch the nomination process. In fact, Kamala was rated the lowest of candidates to be considered for the general election. Knowing this, how else can one begin to delve into the fate of her choice for vice president, notwithstanding her culture and gender? Meanwhile, some U.S. voters are hell-bent on insisting that a rematch between Joe Biden and former President Donald J. Trump exists. But I believe this is nothing more than a ruse. You see, the former president failed to defeat Joe Biden before, and mounting legal troubles coupled with the mistrust of the public that put him there once makes this impossible. As for Joe Biden, all he has to do is secure the nomination of his party to get reelected and hope that Republican voters stay home en masse. A moment before, I said it would be easier for a woman to be the beast over a man as President of the United States. But what I wish to show you is the past events that greased her path to the level of Antichrist. To do this, we must go back. Back to the date that would birth a movement with the broadest appeal to untapped voters, namely women. Women who had been purposefully disenfranchised with the privilege of voting since the inception of the Constitution. Back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to gather enough swath of purposely disenfranchised voters. These collections of voting bloc in time would lead to the women's liberation movement and the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment Act. A time that saw fierce debates over rights and fiercer debates over fashion. To the modern-day Me Too movement, coupled with marches for the first female nominee for the Democratic Party. All of these manipulations of actual human rights were needed in history for women to be seen as victims so they would become serfs and gullible for what would ultimately take place in the end times. For the beast to be handed power, the thought had to be cultivated that society was sexist and racist from the beginning and had to be dismantled. This was purposeful, because no one would have imagined a female president at this country's inception, which is why the events needed to take place for the beast to slip beneath the radar. Men needed to be seen as sexist, mean, and unyielding before the way we vote for a candidate could be based on feelings over facts. Now imagine, a vote cast not on a candidate's ideals, but on their gender. This is why it would be virtually impossible for the beast to come in the cliché appearance of a Caucasian male of a certain height with blonde hair and blue eyes. Everyone would see this character for who he was in modern times a mile away. That image had to become so hated that virtually anyone would turn the opposite way and vote based on past victimization and gender or color. The 2020 election would be the icing on the cake after thousands of years of preparation. If you were ever wondering how society would willingly vote for a charismatic, smiling beast without being aware of its intent, then here it is. As I said before, it was purposeful that the beast appear amiable in order not to raise suspicion. In truth, it was preferred that the beast could appear incompetent in order not to raise suspicion, which is what many perceive in Kamala Harris. A society that once called men sexist would not elect a female president, but would elect a male who would give her that power in his death. Half of the voting populace is female, but it is they who are the hardest to convince to vote for a female president. The very same women who decry forward rights could not imagine a woman competent enough to lead the free world, which is why the history pool was needed. But the clock is ticking. Ticking to the time that the beast can consolidate her power at the United Nations. Power that's needed to get the global change she wants for one world order and one world government. For generations on end, scholars have believed that the beast or the Antichrist would rise out of the Middle East or Europe. But I ask you, what country other than the United States has more sway over the United Nations, Israel, or the global community? This is the arena where the beast will shine at her best and fool the masses. Although initially seeming to be just a smiling, naive leader, the beast will take on a more dominating tone as she circles the globe to bring a 7-year peace to Israel. A peace that will be secured but broken by the beast herself halfway through its completion. Edicts will be issued stopping the Jews from all their sacrifices and offerings. Then, as a climax to all her terrible deeds, the beast shall utterly defile the sanctuary of God. But in God's time and plan, his judgment will be poured out upon this evil one. The beast will enter the Jewish temple that will be rebuilt and declare herself God, as forewarned by Paul in 2 Thessalonians. Having won great secular political power, and having been given all Satan's demonic powers, the beast will be ready to command the world to worship herself as God. The beast will cause all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except for one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of her name. Before that time, millions would insist that they would never participate in such an abomination, but without being able to buy basic food needs or a place to live would change many minds very quickly. Many will accept this form of tyranny as nothing more than an overlay of our current system of government and trading. In preparation for future events, we are already being groomed to accept surveillance in every place but in public bathrooms. Recent pushes for artificial intelligence in every country aid in expediting our entering a one-world computerized government where Bitcoin will be the only acceptable universal currency. For those of you who believe that the United States is the last bastion of freedom and that this could never happen in a democratic society, let me remind you of our brief history. Within several decades of being brought to the American colonies, Africans were stripped of human rights and enslaved as property. In truth, the entire institution of enslavement in America lasted more than 2 centuries. Ironically enough, as it was a moral sin, clergy preached that slavery was the will of God. In 1942, Japanese Americans, half of whom were children, were incarcerated for up to 4 years without due process of law or any factual basis. They were in bleak remote camps surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. Finally, in the year 2020, as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic in the U.S., A series of lockdowns mitigating the spread of pandemic were introduced beginning in March and maintained until July of 2020, when the first wave of the pandemic was largely believed to have passed. These three examples are proof positive that a government by the people and for the people could support a beastly system against such people. Look around at just about everything you purchase, consume, or lease, and you will find it linked to the same system that records your social security number and your address. At any given moment, your government knows where you are within a few feet of your iPhone. In the Middle East, the beast will use the midway point in her brokered peace treaty with Israel to prepare for her final onslaught. The treaty will allow Israel to build a temple on the Muslim Temple Mount and enjoy prosperity and security. Then she will enter the holy place, lay claim to the Jewish temple, and declare herself God. She will command the world to worship her, and they will. However, the Antichrist will break the treaty about 3.5 years into it and persecute the Jewish people. Then she will wage the final war, or the Great War known as the Battle of Armageddon, against Israel. The beast will have the aid of several global militaries from all sides, but Israel will be spared in the woods by God for a time. The Bible describes several wars, but the last war in the Bible is the Battle of Armageddon, or in Hebrew, Megiddo, which refers to the final war between human governments and God. The location you see before you are the actual biblical Mount and Valley of Megiddo, where the last war will be held. This calamitous war will take more lives than any conflict in human history. A vast army of 200 million will release an onslaught that will kill 1/3 of all humankind. This war will bring human rulership to an end. God will gather all the nations of the world down to Jerusalem. Then when Christ returns, the nations will be judged in the valley of Jehoshaphat. This is where the Battle of Armageddon will occur. At that time, there will be such a gripping fear amongst the remaining inhabitants who were left behind after the rapture and who would face unspeakable horrors. Those who remain will wish that they knew something like this could ever happen, could ever take place. They will come to understand that they put their faith in leaders who only looked out for profitable positioning and self-interest. But until that time, all of us will go on living our daily lives, oblivious that anything could ever happen that would trouble our 9-to-5 existence. Life is good for the majority of inhabitants of Earth, whether you are lower income, middle class, or rich. All of us can eke out a niche in life for ourselves. The only blindness that comes is in believing in any one particular group of government that promise you one thing while planning another. Most of us are unfamiliar with the Christ quote, that the Lord will come like a thief in the night, which is similar to how all earth-shaking events occur. For proof, all one has to do is look back at how shocked we were when COVID-19 struck, how naive we were when the towers were brought down, or how surprised we were when the Berlin Wall fell. As I said before, the Antichrist presidency is a prophecy and not an accident. If this is true, it means that the founders themselves, if they knew this, had every intent on denying women the right to vote in order one day that they would fight to elect the beast. The founders denied black citizens the right to vote because they knew one day that they would be mad enough to vote for someone who they believed looked just as they did. In this way, both marginalized groups are happy, and the majority of society feels that they have atoned for something they didn't even know was planned from the beginning. This same political party is always in search of marginalized groups to bring into the fold for votes, and not because they really care. But this is the only vote that will ever matter, the vote for real freedom over tyranny. If we are looking for the Antichrist or the opposite of Christ, then we need to do so in every way, starting with gender. If the first showed up male, the second would be female. The Antichrist would be the daughter of Satan as surely as Christ would be the Son of God. Jesus was born of a virgin, so the Antichrist would be born of a woman who would appear as a virgin, but would have already experienced intimacy. Where Christ was God in flesh, the Antichrist was Satan in flesh. As for Kamala's full name is Kamala Devi Harris. Kamala itself is a name that means lotus or pale red in Sanskrit, the language that existed in India during Christ's 30-year lifespan. The pale red in the Christian Bible represents death. In Hindu, Kamala is another name of a well-known Hindu goddess named Lakshmi, which is why it would be easy for her to claim herself as a god. Kamala's middle name, Devi, is of another goddess, considered to encompass womanhood completely. However, this goddess does have a fierce side and is involved in not only creating worlds, but destroying them as well.
And we're clear.